So here we are in the terrain editor, and I've set myself up with a massive resolution height map. The larger resolutions than this do work, but they make the response of Bryce very slow when you're switching in and out of the lab, so I do tend to try and avoid that option. And besides which, for the most part, this sort of resolution, and even this one, is enough, just depending how close to the camera you've got the terrain. Now, in this video, what I want to do is look at curvature filtering and how it affects the response of the materials, and also the limitations that it has and how we can overcome them. So I'll switch to the main view. Alright, you can see it's a very simple scene. I've got an infinite water plane that just slightly overlaps this ground level here, and I'm also being pestered by windows again. I wish I knew how to turn this option off, because it keeps changing my display settings when I don't want it to, and there is no performance problem. Only Windows seems to think there is. So anybody knows the answer to that, I would really like to know how to stop Windows doing that. Okay, back to where we were. Right, here's the terrain, and at the moment it's just got the default grey material up. I've set the lighting up so I've got some HDRI lighting providing the ambient light, so it's just like a bluish dome, and the Bryce sun providing the direct lighting here. So I've got these shadow regions, and the terrain's got this sort of eroded appearance, so you can see there's some sort of water erosion going on here. Now initially we'll try a material out that doesn't involve curvature filtering, so I'll just go into the material lab. I'm going to select one of the Pro materials that are provided with your content for Bryce 7.1 Pro, so here we go, and I'll select terrains and look through these and see what I want. At glacial terrain, you see on the preview there the size of the terrain is sufficient to bring a bit of snow in for the high ground, so that's nice. It's controlled by, let's have a look what we've got, altitude filtering. So low down we've got this tree looking texture, the treetop texture, and higher up we've got some scrub grass and obviously a bit of snow somewhere very high up. So the dark channel here, this in the C channel, is being controlled by the alpha channel, and so the dark area is bringing in the texture above, and the white area is bringing in the texture below. That's the way it works. So let's give this a quick render and see what we've got. Okay, so that doesn't look bad, but the texture's only responding to the altitudes. So and in this case a slope, so as the slope gets steeper then it brings in a bit of a rock texture, and this tree texture just coming in where it's low down. But what I really want, because I've got this eroded appearance to the land, I want it to be responding to this in and out here in some way, which would be nice, but it isn't. But that can be achieved through curvature filtering, but curvature filtering is limited in two ways. The first way is due to mesh smoothing issues in Bryce. The choice of how the filter responds is dependent on the resolution of the mesh. So if you have a low resolution mesh, you'll see the facets the mesh is made up of. And the other thing is that where you've got a transition between a convex and concave, okay, so you've got a transition between a convex shape and a concave shape, there will be a transitional point that the curvature filtering has to interpret along some kind of line, and then you'll get quite a harsh delineation between what it's interpreted as convex and concave, which will show up in your materials. So if I was to put curvature filtering directly on this material, it would be quite difficult to see what was going on, because this is a sort of a green colour and a lot of this is a sort of a green colour, and it's all quite dark. So to set your curvature filtering up, it's better to do it on something that shows you the difference very effectively, and also allows you to set up the material. So go back into the material lab here, and I'm going to choose very basic texturing for this, so it's possible to spot the difference. So I'll just reset it to default grey. We'll work in the diffuse channel only, and if I hold the shift key down and click on the name and then go to the basic textures in the library, I'll pick out basic spots for this top one and basic spots for this one, and for this texture I'll use basic slope. I'll go back to basic spots now and go into the deep texture editor, and I'm going to just make this none, so there's no kind of output, and then I'm going to set this filter to sine, and then I can just wind the sine up to the top there so it's responding to this bottom channel here that's fully red. Red suits me fine. Okay, I'll check out of that. Now I'll go into the texture source editor for this component, and again I'll set it to nothing. Check out of that and use sine again, and then I'll just wind it at the top so it's red, but holding the Alt key down and clicking on the color swatch, I'll change that from red to fully green. So now that's just full green output for that channel, full red output for that channel, and this basic slope I'm going to modify this one. So I'll just use the alpha output. I don't need the color output here, so I'll just switch that off so we can see what's happening. I'll go to curvature and reset the filter. So at the moment then you can see there's quite a gentle gradient across here, and that's telling me that it will try and interpret the transition between the one convex and concave, depending how it's set up. It'll interpret the curvature gently, or so it will try to do. To make the issues more apparent, what I'm going to do is increase this value in A, which means the transition zone between white and dark becomes narrower, which means that it'll be more of a challenge for it to smooth between convex and concave, all the various curvature response. This B value here allows me to move the transition zone around, so I'll get it more or less in the middle. So I'll now check out of that. You'll notice the preview for the alpha in curvature doesn't work very well, but we are getting a bit of preview on here. You'll need actual selection checked in the preview mode to see the terrain, and on Bryce primitives and that you won't see much effect of the curvature unless you select its ability to world space, because if you can then compress a sphere, for example, the edges will be more curved. But we're not going to look at that. We're not looking at curvature count for bump, because that once again has its own inherent problems, and it's quite slow, and it's probably a bit too advanced for what we're looking at the moment anyway. I might come on to that later if there's any real interest in looking at curvature filtering. Now, calculate curvature has to be checked, and linear scaling is largely to do with where this transition zone appears. So when it's linear scaling, it's as if you've moved these values and compressed them in, so you're getting a different level of response. So you can actually compensate for the scaling by changing the filter here, but there's a handy switch in here, so you can just look at the preview and see whether you think you need it or not, and that'll just modify that. So you can see now that there's something going on here, but this preview is rather small, and find concave allows it to delineate between concave and convex surfaces, and again you'll see there's a difference between linear scaling, and a lot of this boils down to fiddling around and testing things, because you'll find that it's quite difficult to set up a curvature without a lot of testing. Now, hard edges doesn't really create hard edges. What it does, it's determining at the point what it thinks is going to be a concave surface or a convex surface. Now you've got to imagine in where two planes meet, then it's quite easy for it to decide that what shape that is, because they've only got one axis involved. If you imagine a slice sideways through the spine of a book, you could tell which way it's curving. But if you imagine another situation now where you've got a concave surface on one edge and another plane, so like on coming across from there, it's hard to describe this, I probably have to set something up. But essentially, if you've got three axes, you can have a concave surface and a convex surface all occurring at the same spot. So hard edge just determines whether or not it decides it's concave or convex. Again, that's getting a bit complicated, but you can just switch it on and see what the results are, and that's probably the best thing to do. So what have we got hit set here while I was whittering on about that? All of these four checked. That's great. Let's see what it looks like. So the red areas and the strong red areas and the strong green areas are where only one channel is being seen, and these some muddy coloured areas are where you've got both channels in play and you've got a mixture. So actually that would be quite nice, but as I think you can already see, there's some patchiness occurring here which is looking a bit odd. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the camera into the surface and take a closer look at what's going on here. Right. Now, as I hope you can see now, there's clear squares, and these are the facets that make up the surface of this mesh that is the terrain. Now, before, when it was just a default grey material, which is easy enough to achieve if I just set it to default grey, and go over here, the facets are far less visible except where you've got shadow casting, and the reason for this is that there's I think it's called garage shading that's hiding the faceted nature. Unfortunately that doesn't exist for curvature. I'll just use Ctrl-Z to get back to my curvature material, pop that back in, so these hard edges appear and they become quite visible where you've got materials. And the other thing is that here there's a transition zone between what it's considering to be convex and what it's considering to be concave, and likewise here, and they're going to show up badly. So what can we do to combat this? Well, I'll edit the terrain, and the first and most obvious solution seems to be to increase the resolution of the terrain. As a result of increasing the resolution, it will attempt to interpret intermediate points, but that's not always highly successful, as we'll have a little look now at this. So, well, the squares have got smaller, which is successful, but we've still got these hard edges occurring, which, no matter how high a resolution we make the terrain, will interfere. Now, it may occur to you think we can smooth the terrain, and that will smooth out these problems. And to some extent, you're right in thinking that that is a potential solution. But as you'll see, although the terrain is now smooth, so the transitions across areas which are roughly convex are smoother, you've still got these hard edges that are occurring where the curvature filter can't decide, is this convex or concave? So although this, in theory, well, you would think should be flat, and you should have a smooth transition across the surface, it's getting confused because what you've got here is a mixture of convex and concave, and it's having to pick one or the other, and it's making a choice that's resulting in a hard transitional edge. You need to test this to see what's going on, really. I mean, I could tell you these things all day long, but until you see it in action, it doesn't really click. The thing with curvature filtering is you just want the effect to look right, and while ever you've got these hard edges, it's never going to look right. So the thing to do is overcome these hard edges. And as things stand, there isn't any mechanic within Bryce that allows you to do that. However, there is ways around this problem. So I'll switch back to my original view, and things from a distance are probably going to look okay. So it's, oh, well, I say that, you can see there's quite a hard blotchy transitions here, and these little squares. So even at this distance, the resolution is proving a problem. So what I'm suggesting here is, bearing in mind when you see how slow it was into the material lab, then that's as a result of using the higher resolution terrain, that this is a filter, the alpha filter that does the filtering. So if we can generate a black-white alpha filter based on curvature and capture one appropriate to this terrain, we can bring it back in as a picture and use that. And the advantage of using a picture is that we can process that picture in, say, PaintShop Pro and use smoothing on it, and that'll reduce the effect of these hard edges. So what I'm going to do now, because this is an alpha output, is switch ambient control over to this output and get rid of the diffuse response. So this will give me an ambient output based on the curvature. Now for this I need the global ambient to be set up, and I'm probably not going to need this infinite plane, so I'll get rid of that, and I'm going to turn the atmosphere off and set it for now fully black. The choice of the background colour will be determined by what colour is at the edge of this terrain, as you will see. To get the response, I'm going to need ambient output, so I'm going to turn the global ambient output to fully white, and I go into the Skylab and image-based lighting. I'm going to turn my HDRI image off, and that resets it to the default sky, which is a little bit inconvenient because I was just busy setting things up. But if I press Ctrl Z and then Ctrl Z again, that will restore my sky, but without the HDRI image. I'll go back in the Skylab, and even though I've not set anything to respond to the diffuse light, I'm going to turn the sunlight off, and that should just help with rendering efficiency. Now I'll just render this scene so you can see where we are. So this is going to be my control, alpha control for curvature, but I need to capture it from directly above. So for this, I'll select a side view, roll back, get hold of the terrain, and copy and paste the terrain. Might seem like a strange choice. I'm going to edit this terrain, and I'm going to convert it to a cube. And I'm going to modify the attributes of the cube. Now you can see as it's almost 2000, so I'm going to make it 2000 and by 2000 by 2000. Okay, and then while I'm at it, I'm going to set or check the height of that, because I want the camera to be set at the origin of this cube. So I was at 125, so I select my camera now. That's probably easier to do it here. Go to the attributes for the camera and set it at 0 and 0, so it's on the same origin as the cube. I'm going to set that Y value there for rotation at 0 and the X value at 90, which is pointing down. And now here's the critical bit, and I've got these figures written down somewhere, so I'll just bring that up. Okay, I'll just copy this from the other window. You need a field of view of 90 and a scale of exactly 72.656, a value arrived at by, well, just experimentation. And that will place the camera in the middle of the cube, pointing down. Now I select the cube as well as the camera by holding the Control key down and then holding the Shift key down while clicking on the cube, and then lift the pair of them up together so they're above the terrain. It doesn't matter what height above the terrain. What matters next is when I select the cube and not the camera and modify the material, I need it to be reset to default grey, fully transparent with no refraction, and then I can just get rid of the diffuse. Even though I've got no diffuse source in this scene, this is now going to modify the way the camera views the ground, because when it goes through this surface, it changes the normals of the viewing ray, whatever it is that comes from the camera or goes back into the camera. It's hard to know which way around these things work, to normal to the surface of that geometry. So when I check out of this now and switch to the camera view, I'm now getting an orthogonal view of the terrain. But to work with the settings that I chose for the camera, which is the field of view and scale, I need to modify the aspect ratio of the scene. So I'll go to Document Setup, change it to 1:1, and then I need this output to be an appropriate resolution for whatever I'm going to feed it back into as an image. So if I select 2048, which I believe was the resolution to which I'd set the terrain, and check out of that, then when I render it, it's going to be quite a big image. So long as I'm set on the image, I can chart its progress, I can zoom out, and that's not really making the render any smaller, it's just shrinking my view of it. And then I can see how long this is going to take to render. So I'll give this a quick render now and see what it's going to be like. Okay, so you can see it's not taking that long to render, but I anticipate, because of the complex nature of this image, it's got a lot of transitions between black and white, it will have a lot of noise in it. So when it comes to the anti-aliasing pass, I'm just looking at it on its main pass here, it'll be quite slow. So what I'll do at this point is I'll pause the video and then we'll come back to processing this image. Okay, as you can see, that's nearly done and it's taken a couple of 3 minutes. And what I forgot to mention in all the excitement is that sometimes you see a pixel along this edge and along that edge that is the camera just seeing a bit of the background due to the fact that this doesn't seem to be quite centered in world space underneath the camera, even though it is. It's done little offset in the renderer somewhere. So if this edge is predominantly dark, choose a sky that's predominantly black, and if it's white, then do the opposite. We'll find out anyway when we look in the paint package whether I've guessed and been lucky, or whether I'm going to have to render it again. Might be able to fix it in the paint package, that's the other option. So this preview, because I've zoomed out, is probably not going to look like the final image. So I'll just save this as Curvature Capture 1, and then I'll get PaintShop Pro on the go once that's saved, and we'll have a look what our image is like. Okay, so you can see it looks a bit brighter than it did before, and if I now zoom in on this edge, you can see that it's a black edge and it's meeting a mixture of black and white. So maybe just the filtering will sort this out. Other things to note is these edges here obviously mark quite a sharp transition, and here, so you might be able to, well, depending how close you are to the terrain, you would be able to see these sharp transition zones, and that spoil the effect of whatever materials you are putting on. So to sort this out, we can also modify the contrast here. So if we wanted more of the white areas in, or more darkness, or just to increase the contrast between the two, then you know, there's that option. So let's see what we've got. Fade correction. I think that will just fade out. Just do some contrast modification. See, that doesn't seem to have had much effect actually. Just made it a little bit higher in contrast. So obviously there's a good contrast range in this image anyway. And the effect that's probably going to help us most is blurring. So if I can adjust blur, Gaussian blur, and then choose the filter size, I've chosen 2.5 here, and you can see that's taking a lot of the noise out of that image, but still leaving some transitions. I can preview it here. So you see we've still got the overall structure, but we've lost a lot of the finer detail noise, which would spoil the effect of the material. So we're still getting a bit of a blurred transition between these harder edged areas. So I'll just try that one out and we'll go in and have a look. So you can see now where that would have been a sharp transition, now there's a bit of blurring, which will help a lot. So file, I'll save copy as, I'll just save it as a JPEG. Not using too much compression, I'll just bring that in and look at it, because JPEG compression itself will add noise, but that's been okay. There's a little bit of hatching there, but it's not too bad. So, and there's no point in providing Bryce with very compressed images, because it will uncompress it to use it in its lowest compression format, because you don't want to lose any quality. So I just saved it as JPEG so I could differentiate between the bitmap image that I'd already saved for speed. So if I go back to my original scene, so I'll just launch that one in where we were before, because obviously the capture one's not really appropriate for that. Now it'll restore my lighting here, and then go into the material for that, and then I can put in my material that is selected from the Pro materials. There we go. Somewhere in here, terrains, wasn't it? Terrains, glacial terrain there, and then I can swap out for this for a picture. So I go into the texture source editor for pictures, select an empty square. Be careful not to click off this while you've got this dialog open, otherwise the dialog will drop behind Bryce, and then you'll need to select it again from the task manager, and it can seem like Bryce has crashed, but it hasn't. I select my JPEG image in there. Now I'm going to use it in the alpha channel, so I need to copy and paste it into the alpha, and then this one, since I'm not using it, I'll blank it down. I don't know whether that'll save me any memory or whether it knows that that was a copy as that, but I don't trust that it does, so I'll just keep that in the alpha channel. And now here we've got the curvature that's been captured controlling the material. Now, I don't know how this is going to look because I've not tried it yet, and I probably want to modify the material. So that's looking a bit dark, and really the two materials are still rather close to one another to offer any sort of dramatic effect. So at this stage, if I keep this texture which is providing the snow and change this one here, so I can see what predominant effect is, but just change it to a really bright colour, then I can see where it's going to be turning up in the scene. So it's quite evenly blended, except for where it's arriving along this top edge. So at the moment then, because the curvature height map's predominantly grey, the effect of the curvature filtering is getting somewhat lost. So at this point what I need to do is increase the contrast of this still further. So if I go into brightness and contrast here, you can see I can modify this so that I've got preview here. We've got a lot more impressive difference between the two. So I can just see whether I want more white or less white. But what I'm trying to do is avoid too much grey, so I get a better effect. So I think I can increase the contrast so it almost becomes a black and white image, like so. But then I'll have the harsh transitions problem, so I could try blurring it again. Because this is recorded at a higher resolution than my original terrain, then it'll give the illusion of extra detail. So I'll try a really high contrast version, and then effects, adjust blur, and Gaussian blur again. So now you can see that it's going to delineate between the two textures a lot more dramatically. I'll save copy as, and I'll call this number 2. So having gone to the trouble of capturing the curvature for this terrain, then having a paint package that can process the image offers you a lot of adjustment post work. So I'll go back into material now, and because I've already loaded this one in, it knows the resolution of this image, so I can just load this one straight into the alpha channel here, and then we should see a more dramatic response between the two. So now you can see that these outer edges here, there and there, are responding to the orange area. Now what I want these is to be like barren rock, and the other area to be the snow bit. So I can show you that. I'll go into the material lab now, go into the picture, and this control here allows you to flip white for black, so that'll change the alpha response, which means it's quite easy to switch those two channels over. And now you can see we're getting closer to something that's going to hopefully work. So what I want to do now is just pick out a material for this that looks like stone. So I go into material lab, hold the shift key down, click on texture, and see what textures I've got kicking about that might look like stone. That looks like it might be a bit stony, and it's going to be a high contrast between this other one, which is what I was looking for. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so now I've got that texture in there. It's just going to take a little while to render, but the advantage is that it's not having to calculate curvature anymore, so it will be more efficient rendering because we've already taken the pain of the calculating curvature when we captured the curvature map. So I'll just let this one render out, and then that'll be the end of this tutorial. Oh, hang on, before I render that out, I'll just save this camera position, and we'll go in, as we did before, and take a look at the surface here, because hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate by using, I'll just do a small area, by using this map, you can see that you can't see any pixelation or hard transitions between these two materials, even though they're high contrast, so you would expect to be able to see here any problem. And the reason is, as I was saying, the map that I captured was 2048 by 2048, so that's large resolution, but it's used on a terrain that's only 1024 by 1024, so the resolution of the map that we're using is higher than the resolution of the terrain, and that's good. I could probably get away with lowering the resolution of the terrain still further if I needed to save memory, and because of using procedural materials, so they operate at whatever resolution you're viewing them at. You can't get too close to procedural material, really. I suppose effectively you can, but depending on the scale of material. But they're a lot more tolerant than bitmap images. So that means you've got far more options for scaling things up or down and still retaining a fairly good looking image. So as I say, I'll let this render out, which is not going to take very long, and then we'll call that the end of the tutorial. So there you go. That's one approach to overcoming the problems that are inherent from using the curvature filter. Even though the mesh smoothing issue could be overcome by correcting that in Bryce, you'd still have this transitional problem where the interpretation of what is convex and what is concave becomes confused when you've got another plane involved. So if you're just looking along one axis, then it's easy to tell whether you're looking at a convex or a concave surface. But when you introduce another axis, so you I know the perfect example, a saddle shape. Okay, imagine a saddle, like a, on a horse. Your legs go over one way, so it looks like it's convex, but front to back, you're sitting in a dip, so that looks like it's concave. And that's exactly the problem that Bryce has in determining whether something's convex and concave. And when you use hard edges, it decides whether or not that point in the middle is going to be convex or concave, because that's the kind of decision that's got to be made. Because on a saddle, really, it's neither, is it? Depending which direction you look from it. If you look from the side, it looks like it's concave, and looks from the front, it looks like it's convex. So that's essentially the nature of the problem. I should have mentioned that earlier, but I didn't. I forgot about that example. So there you go. That's the end of the tutorial.